Hi everyone. Today's video is to give you an introduction to the Florida Everglades, known as the Florida Everglades National Park, and also talk about some of the threats facing the Everglades National Park. In a future video, we'll talk a little bit about some of the legal maneuvering that's been done over the past 20-30 years in efforts to try to restore the park. So Everglades National Park is located in the southern part of the state of Florida. It's part of the jurisdiction of the South Florida Water Management District. It's also under the jurisdiction of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, the Army Corps of Engineers, and is looked after also by its resident Native American tribe, the Miccosukee tribe. The park is accessible to visitors, and I've taken some tours, and I hope that some of the students watching this video will also take tours, and there's even cabins within the park. When you go to the park, you can see a lot of native Florida species, including alligators, crocodiles, turtles, snakes, rabbits, birds, you name it. If it lives in Florida, it's probably in the Everglades. And Everglades is even home to some of the few remaining Florida panthers. Now, the problem is the Everglades faces a number of threats. The first of these is simply reduction to its size. For millions of years, the Everglades stretched from the southern tip of Florida almost up to UCF. This was a huge swath of land. It was known as, well, it's been coined the River of Grass. And because we have such abundant rainfall in Florida, there was almost always some level of water on the ground, maybe just a few inches, maybe a few feet. And interspersed with all this water that was flowing from the central Florida area down through Lake Okeechobee and then out to the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean through the Everglades was grass and trees, cypress trees, mangrove trees, and it was just a slow-moving, very vegetative, rather shallow river, and that's what formed the Everglades. What happened was over about the last 150 years, human intrusion has very intentionally drained the Everglades. You can just look around anywhere around UCF, Orlando, or drive south, and what you see is just swaths of residential and commercial development, streets, factories, businesses, what have you, and all of that was paved on what was once the River of Grass. In addition to the human intrusion for residential purposes, agricultural interests also set up across South Florida. At the current time, there's approximately 500,000 acres of corporate farms all around what's left of the Everglades. In addition to the human intrusion for human development and for human agriculture, the Army Corps of Engineers actually went in and deliberately drained large areas of the River of Grass, rerouting the water through canals and levees and dikes out to the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico, thereby basically starving the Everglades of the traditional ongoing refreshing of the hydrology. So the net result of all this is the Everglades is now 1/3 of what it was 150 years ago, and it's very unlikely that that size will ever be recovered. Now, in addition to its loss of size and its loss of water, which are two major threats, the Everglades is also being faced with the intrusion of many non-native species known as exotic species, which are taking over the natural flora and fauna. One of the most publicized of these is the Burmese python, which if you just Google or YouTube any video, you'll see the Burmese python eating just about everything that comes in its path, even the American alligator. Because it has no natural predators except maybe the American alligator or the crocodile in the Everglades, it's just spawning and taking over to the point where the state of Florida has even authorized python hunts just to try to limit its impact. There's other species. There's the Nile tree frog and some other reptilian and mammal creatures which are also invasive, which are also causing harm. But in addition to that, there's quite a bit of invasive flora. There's Brazilian pepper, there's Australian pine, and these are plant species that have come in and are doing essentially the same thing as the Burmese python. They're taking over. They're driving out the native flora. So it's a real problem, the invasive species taking over in the Everglades, in addition to the loss of land, in addition to the loss of water resources. The final really large threat to the Everglades is from the agricultural uses all around the park. Most large farms, which is what's around the Everglades, large corporate farms, particularly for sugar, use quite a bit of fertilizer and quite a bit of insecticides and pesticides to kill off unwanted insects in the area. Once these fertilizers and pesticides are sprayed on the farms, next rainfall, the remnants all wash down, wash into the water, and the water, a lot of it still does make its way to the Everglades, and it's very polluted with fertilizers and insecticides and pesticides. That's causing all sorts of ecological problems. It's killing insects in the Everglades. It's over fertilizing the aquatic species, the vegetation in the Everglades, which then grows out of control and eventually fills in what were naturally wet areas, basically turning wet areas like wetlands into dry land, which is not what the Everglades traditionally is composed of. So these are all the threats facing the Everglades. In the next video, we're going to talk about some efforts by the state of Florida and by the federal government to try to restore that 1/3 of the Everglades, which is still remaining. If you're interested, you also may want to take a look at some of the pictures I have in this module showing what the river grass looks like and some of the plant and animal species that are currently there.